Hello, and welcome to our special Graduates Looking Forward to the Future LinkedIn and Facebook Live broadcast. I'm your host, Justin Crow, Vice President of Education Programs and Partnerships at Providence. As a reminder, the information provided during this event is for info purposes only. If you have any medical questions, please remember to reach out to your primary care or healthcare professional. Now let's go ahead and begin. Joining me today during this live event will be Father Oliver Doyle, President of the University of Providence, and Scott McClarty, Head of School at Providence High School. Welcome.
Thanks, you. Justin. Great to be here.
So before we start, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. I think when most folks think of Providence health system, they obviously think of healthcare. But at Providence, we believe that education is an essential component of our vision of health for a better world. We've actually deepened our investments in education, really establishing a commitment to support educators and students in the communities that we serve. And that renewed focus on education is really a continuation of the work of our founding sisters, who focused on health as well as education when they settled in the Pacific Northwest in California over 175 years ago. So as we move to our topic today, I think everyone knows COVID-19 has radically impacted our lives, both the workforce and our education system. And there's a lot of uncertainty. So thinking about the upcoming school year, we don't know if it's going to be online or in person. For seniors that are graduating from university, they're entering a really uncertain job market. So I wanted to start with a question for both panelists. And Scott, I'll start with you. So what are you hearing from graduating seniors about the upcoming uncertainty? What are the concerns they have? What are the hopes they have?
Yeah, a few things come to mind immediately. One is the current sense of loss, right? Not having prom in person or graduation in person or awards assemblies in person. That loss is very real, and it's been important for us to acknowledge that that's a real thing and respond to it appropriately. I'm also hearing a lot of anticipatory grief, right, as they look to attend college in the fall, whether it's the University of Providence or any number of our great educational institutions in the country. A lot of schools have already announced that the fall is going to be online, that they won't have residential programs. And so they're already, in the midst of feeling this current loss, they're already feeling the loss of what they were anticipating to be this great start to their college experience. I think they're also, although they're still, they're heading into a collegiate experience and not necessarily directly into the workforce, I think there's a lot of anxiety about what the workforce is going to look like and what jobs are going to be available at the end of all this. But I'm also hearing all the excitement and hope and new opportunities that come from a graduating senior heading off to a new stage in their life. And, we're the pioneers after all. And so I think they're really taking that mascot to heart and turning it into an identity, which is really exciting to see.
Oh, that's great, Scott. Thank you. Father, what are you hearing?
Well, I like Scott, have a number of thoughts and a number of comments that they have shared with me. There's a great stress about, are they going to have a job? That's primary, the first focus, that they are very concerned about the loss of the possibilities for their career movements. There's also, but it's there, but it's less than the career one, is anxiety that some of the mental anguish that they experience because of sheltering in place, because of that will continue, that will not go away even as easier, or as easily as finding a job. That's one. There's a lack of trust in people. Now, what do I mean by that? Is that people that they could be familiar with and comfortable around, now they have to wear masks and they have to keep social distancing. So that's a very different world. The one thing that I've heard, the one word, when are we going to get back to normal? And it's normal. And so I try and sort of challenge that and say, well, the normal you and I have known up to mid-March is not going to return. This is the normal now. And no disrespect, they are children, or they're young people of their age. This sort of discombobulation, this turning their world upside down, is not something that they have any skill with. So they have to learn journeying through this. So I think that they're the main things. They're concerns about anxiety, about jobs, about relationships also, and also just their future. So they'd be, for me, the main things I'm hearing from our folks.
Okay.
Just to jump off on that, if I might, one of the things that you reminded me of, Father Oliver, is, you know, one of the things that all of our students, not just our seniors or your seniors, all of our students have lost is the social connections that come just serendipitously, not even like through the formal processes of education and going to class and sitting next to the same people every day, but the people you happen to run into when you walk down a hallway, when you walk through the quad, when you go to the bathroom. And think about how many of those experiences for teenagers and for young people are unsupervised, right? The adults aren't around or watching or looking, and they get to be themselves. And now they're living at home with their parents 24/7. And there's this great loss of those little times of unsupervised being with each other. And they're really feeling that.
They have lost the familiar rhythm of their lives, being totally interrupted.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to bounce off of that. We talked about students, but what about parents? You know, I particularly with high school parents, but I think this is relevant to both. How are they dealing with this uncertainty?
Well, I mean, we all deal with things in different ways, right? And parents are the same. And, you know, I'm hearing a lot of generalized worry, of course. They want their kids to be happy and successful and contributing citizens. And there's so much uncertainty and volatility right now. They're dealing with a lot of the same feelings of loss that their kids are. They wanted to take pictures of their kids dressed up before going to prom, right? And so some of them are hosting little Zoom proms or proms in the front yard with physical distancing. And the other thing that I'll mention is that they're looking to us for consistency, for communication, and for support and encouragement. And so we found that it's really important for us to provide that in new ways and consistent ways for our parents so that they're better able to support their students.
And indeed, I can echo some of what Scott's saying about parents, but obviously for the different age group, that particularly around graduation, there was a great loss for families where in some families, maybe this was their first generation to actually walk across a stage or have that opportunity. And from January, tickets were booked from various, reservations were made from various parts of the country and even further south and abroad, Europe, and all of that went by the way because of coronavirus. So there is that just that breach in an expectation, something that maybe a generation or two were building towards. So there's that, but there's also for first-year students and for all of our students, parents are deeply concerned that if they entrust their son or daughter to us in September as an on-campus community, what's the risks? Have we attended to, insofar as humanly possible, to limit those risks? And I'm also hearing, you know, just in my other role as pastor in one of the parishes here in town, parents whose children or their young adults would not have been coming here, but are going out of state or to some other institution in the state, are very concerned about just letting go. It's puts another layer on the empty nest syndrome that parents can, you know, experience. Will they be safe? Will they get back? You know, again soon. We have international students, and there's a difficulty about, well, should we let them come back? There's a concern about letting them come back. So there's those concerns, and yet a real willingness and a desire to sort of blink in the face of the risk, not us now, but parents, and say, well, we need to let them go also. So there's this conflict. So that's
We're hearing a lot of the same things. And the one positive thing I would say too that we're hearing a lot of from parents is some really good and healthy things are coming out of remote learning, right? For instance, we have kids that are sleeping better. They're spending more time with their family, and the families are growing stronger because of it. We have students who are eating better, right? Because they're eating at home and not out all the time. There are students who thrive in a more independent environment and are taking advantage of that. But there are also, those students who are struggling and have a particularly difficult time in that environment, or don't have the best home life, and school was their sanctuary,
That's
right?
true.
And so these are really complex times. And in some ways, the complexity was already there and always there, but a new light is being shined on all of this. And I think embedded in that are great opportunities for us to serve our families and our students in new ways.
Indeed, to your last point, what I think one of the benefits might be the wrong word, but sort of one of the lighter sides or the brighter sides is that it has provided us with opportunities. They may not be the opportunities we would have sought, but opportunities to be very intentional about delivering on our mission. Because we've had students, international students, that have been trapped, and because of federal law and requirements about study visas, they can't go home, they can't get a job because of federal law, and even if there were jobs available, even summer jobs, where they were maybe up to a few weeks ago, maybe it's not the best living condition. So we've with care and risk limitations on risk, we've opened the campus to them. And we had an appeal here locally in the city a few weeks back, but we made the needs of students in difficult circumstances a priority. And we were able to fund having them live on campus, follow our directives for safe distancing and all of that, and then provide them with food, though our catering facility is closed. So there's an opportunity there too, if we can be just, not that we look for that or we would want that, but it's to be aware of how we can respond with the mission intentionality in these circumstances too. I think that's sort of a challenge.
That's a great example, Father Oliver. I think what both of you have highlighted, it brings to mind a reflection I heard around educators, which is that we have to remember that we're in the same storm, but we're all not necessarily in the same boats.
That's right.
And we have to have kind of the emotional intelligence to understand that, and working with colleagues and in working with students to make sure that we kind of really tailor to the needs that they have individually. So let me ask you a question then. So we've talked a little bit about the uncertainty, how parents and students are dealing with it, but what advice are you giving to graduating seniors as they make these big life decisions? So about attending college or university, or taking a gap year, or entering the workforce. So let's, Scott, let's start with you on that one.
Sure. I think the first thing that comes to mind is that there are very few things that I would say sort of across the board as advice to every student and family, because individual circumstances vary quite a lot between individual students and families. And so one of the things that I can say to that, and I've been saying, is have honest conversations as a family, and encouraging students to be honest with their parents about what they want and what their real deepest desires are for their future, not just their collegiate experience, but their long-term future, and use that as a guide for decision making. I would also say, don't be afraid. There's a great temptation here to fall into fear, and fear is the worst condition within which to make really important decisions as an individual, or as a family, or as a school. And so I don't say don't be afraid in a Pollyanna-ish way. Oh, just ignore the situation. But don't be afraid, because you've been prepared, because you have supports, because you have been empowered and you have a voice and you know how to use it, and because you've spent these last 4 years and beyond at Providence getting to know yourself and growing as an individual and as a family, and you can rely on that. And that allows you to then reframe these challenges and these difficult times as opportunities. It might just end up looking differently than anyone had imagined just 6 months ago.
For me, again, you have to take each, invitation to give advice on its own merits. But in broad strokes, I think if the question is the fear or the uncertainty about moving into higher ed is around material needs or lack thereof, because when you were referencing a question there about parents, many of the parents I encounter are concerned, can we now afford to send our son or daughter to a university? And usually, again, there are those people that are the most vulnerable in the socioeconomic category. So if the concern is about material, well, we would try and alleviate that in some way for them, without doing harm to finances and that. But other than that, if it's an emotional sort of, they're afraid, well, I tend to think of the great mythic heroes. Now, I know that's a very exotic sort of thought. I get that, right? But like part of the growing up process, if you look at the great Greek stories, the great stories of the heroes of literature and culture, they young folks have had to transition from adolescence into adulthood by a series of challenges, by a series of facing the adult world. And while it wouldn't be glib in saying let's not be do not be afraid, but you frame it in such a way that this is part of the growing into adult process, the world of security that every young person has a right to experience, sort of begins to dissolve as they transition into adult, and it's replaced by another set of securities. So I'd encourage them to be brave and face sort of the challenge of growing into this new space of adulthood.
I think both those are really great responses. And, I think, Father Oliver, kind of what you highlighted really fits with what we think about it in terms of whole person growth in education. That it's not just the school books. It's not just taking a math class. Part of this is we all have an opportunity, but certainly students to grow during this time outside of the classroom.
That's right. Yep. And we shouldn't, while we naturally have to worry and be concerned, but if we have done the essentials of Catholic education in broad strokes, but in that whole sense of helping people to grow so that they can flourish as human beings and the ones who contribute and live virtuous lives in the broad sense of that word, well, then they just need encouragement to step into that and embrace it.
Yeah, your mention, Father Oliver, of the hero's journey got me thinking again about our identity as pioneers, and that we're all on an adventure, right? Sure. This is an adventure. Adventures always involve great risk, right? And standing on a precipice and walking a fine line with a cliff on one side of us. That's right. But there's also enormous fun and growth and energy and excitement that comes from an adventure, and that's a really powerful way of reframing the situation we all find ourselves in, whether we're adults or teenagers.
Well, with just one caveat, the fun and excitement comes a little later in it. When we look back, when you're going through it, it may not, the fun element might not be that obvious, but I take your point.
Well said.
Yeah.
So, Father Oliver, you mentioned, I think, an important component, which is that both schools are Catholic educational entities. And so, Scott, the next question is for you. So you lead an independent Catholic high school. So how is that education, which is really specific in a lot of ways, how's that prepared seniors to deal with this uncertainty?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, having a faith-based, values-based education is incredibly powerful because, one, it means that there is an environment from the very beginning in which the ultimate questions aren't ignored. We're actually encouraged in every way to engage in them. As the adult community, as the student community, as a parent community, those big, important questions about the good, the true, and the beautiful, about what the ultimate goals of life are and what our deepest desires are that end up being the very desires that God has for us are incredibly powerful in dealing with adversity. It doesn't get rid of adversity. It simply makes us better prepared to respond to it, right? And that's at the core of what I think a really effective Catholic education is. And stemming out from that are all sorts of great skills that we develop through life, and hopefully we get better and better at them. We don't just learn them in high school. We learn to take responsibility for our actions, for our mistakes, and for the really great and amazing things that we do. We learn how to become leaders, and at Providence, we provide so many opportunities for students to step into that role and to risk being a leader and to take on the vulnerability of being a leader in all sorts of ways. And the goal is that they've been prepared not just for jobs that haven't been invented yet, but for lives that have yet to be lived. And so many things, we all know, that things happen in our lives, some of which are completely out of our control and some of which are, or only partly. And we learn to get better and better, right? We're not just resilient, we're anti-fragile. We actually take, that's what we want from our students. We want them to actually get better through adversity rather than just snap back to who they were before, as resilience suggests.
That's great. Thank you. Father, anything you would add?
Well, again, I think the challenge and what we try to do here at the university is is to help students to make sense of living in the messy middle of life. And gosh, like who could say that life right now for all of us is not right in the messy middle, because of even more so, right, because of the coronavirus. But sometimes we can see stress and messy middleness as something to be avoided. But how do we make sense of that? So that what they learn here and what they have been invited to reflect on can serve them in their work lives or in their personal lives or their lives be out off the campus. And what I mean by that is, when you have certain compasses that you can depend on or rely on to help you navigate through the messy middle, well, you're always going to have them. And so in a liberal arts scenario, we try and help develop those compasses, such as being able to reflect somewhat like what Scott has already said, like the good and the not so good. But like, how do I make decisions that are in tune with the type of person I want to be, or to be a little more scriptural about it? How do I make those decisions so that I can flourish as a child of the all-loving God that I'm called to? And that to me is the distinctive characteristic of Catholic education, and also one of the undercurrents, as it were, of a liberal arts Catholic education in the intellectual tradition of our faith. And I think it's much more about the characteristics you develop that will always stand to you, whatever the pandemic that you are thrown into the middle of. Wherever you find yourself in that.
Yeah, Father, I think that's a really great call out, particularly on liberal arts. I'm a liberal arts graduate, and I feel like particularly these last 3 months, that foundation was so helpful because it taught me how to think and how to adapt.
That's right.
And not necessarily how to do one specific thing. And I think if we're honest with each other, like we've had to do nothing but think and adapt the last 3 months.
And sit in silence. And sit in silence with our own company. And quietly curse technology when we can't get it to work the way we want it to. Not a bad curse now, but
never. But people never fail to underestimate the importance of time to think, to turn the computer off, to shut down the Zoom and Teams meetings, and to really think and to read and to explore new ideas, because that feeds our ability to respond well to the needs in front of us, just like the sisters did. And one other aspect of not just a liberal arts education, but a Catholic liberal arts education that's, I think, particularly relevant now, and that is there is no conflict between a Catholic approach to life and a scientifically informed approach to life. And so from a Catholic position, we get to take science and everything that epidemiologists and virologists and clinicians are telling us, and we get to trust in that, right? And we get to bring the values of a Catholic education and combine it with the wisdom that science is bringing us in support of public health, support of our individual health, and we get to embrace both of those. It's never an either or situation in Catholic education. It's always both and, which is really effective in times like this.
And of course, that's to the source of the tradition of Catholic intellectual tradition, which was to build on the sciences, to build on the great classics, and not to sort of shun them, but to take what is important and worthwhile and applicable to life, and weave it into the faith story, which more accurately called theology. But yes, indeed, yeah.
I see some questions coming up on the side here, so I'm gonna ask a couple of those as well. So, and this might be the final question, and then we'll go to final thoughts. So, question from the audience is: how do you keep motivated, and how do you motivate your teachers, your faculty, and your students during this time, particularly as everything has changed?
Sure. With effort and consistency, being honest. Answering all of those. Well, I keep motivated by, I have very intentionally in my private life limited my exposure to news and actually retreated. Now I haven't become a Luddite. I'm not avoiding, technology or anything like that, but I censor what I take in. And I have found, even to the point of, I sleep much better without having listened to an hour's news earlier in the evening. I listen to music much more. I because of a vision difficulty, I can't read as much. So I listen to Audible books. If that's not a plug, I'm sorry. It's not meant to be. But so that's easier. And so for me, the important thing is that I get rest so that I can focus and so that I can turn up to meetings online or however they're Skype or whatever, refreshed and be able to motivate people. So and with my team here at the university, I when I encounter materials that are inspirational, that help build people, I'll distribute those and we'll have a discussion about their impact. So they're the main two. As of now, we're not encountering students, in a direct way. I'm not facing into students, front line, as it were. So they'd be the main.
Yeah, I resonate a lot with what you said, Father Oliver. In particular, my reliance on Audible. One of my favorite things to do is walk and listen to books at 1.5 speed. I love it, and that's been really important. And drawing a line too. Like if I don't have to be on video on a call because I don't need to share my screen or present, I have been very intentional about taking the call on my phone and walking. And that has been really helpful to me. And I personally rely on my family. Sure. And I rely on our team at Providence. I inherited and have been working with an unbelievable leadership team, and the whole faculty and staff. I've been so inspired by their pivot. And one of the things that, to end with just two quick things. We've been meeting weekly with our faculty and staff, and every week there's a special guest, a parent, a board member, an alum who shows up for 5 minutes just to give an update, say thank you, offer words of support and encouragement. And that has gone so far. And then the other thing is, I think it's important, especially in times like this, to allow yourself as a leader to be vulnerable, to say when you don't know, to admit when this feels like a lot, like you might not be able to handle it, but that we together, by focusing on our mission and by focusing on our vision and values, can handle it as a community. And that's been really powerful as well.
Yep. And the
That's
quiet time just to reflect at the end of the day, where I can sort of just let it, just to make sense of it, to actually live what I advise others to do, is to try and get a handle on, to discern the messy middle. And sometimes that leads me into prayer or reflection on scripture or something like that. So that they'd be the main ways. And of course, what really buoys me up are the people that I do not encounter face to face. They're just a voice in the space around me most of the day. But trying to work with those and being encouraged by them really helps me also.
Well, I think we're actually out of time. So I just want to thank both of you for joining us today. Scott McLarty, head of school for Providence High School in Burbank, and Father Oliver Doyle, president at the University of Providence at Great Falls and online. And I want to thank everyone for listening and really sending your questions and your comments. And so to learn more about our initiatives, our programs, and our services and ways to give, please visit psjh.give.providence.org. And just a reminder, if you're looking for help or medical advice, please visit providence.org. And then finally, make sure to follow us on social media. There's lots of great stories, inspirational, that are there. You can follow us on Providence on Twitter, and then Providence Health System on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. So thank all of you, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Justin.
Thanks, Father Doyle. Thanks, Justin.
Thank you.